The deafening hum of Hope's Edge echoed through the ship's hull as Captain Eliana Solis paced across the command ridge, her oats clicking against the cold metal floor. Her crew moved swiftly, preparing for what could either last stand. The Void Lords, an ancient and ruthless alien race, had taken every planet in their path. Earth, humanity's final refuge, was their next target. The reports flooding in from every sector painted a grim picture. The Void Lord fleet was already within striking distance, and the human defenses were outgunned, outnumbered, and airily holding together. "Status report, Commander Voss," Solis demanded, her voice steady yet betraying a flicker of urgency. Commander Voss, the ship's second-in-command, looked up from the tactical display, his face drawn tight with concern. "They're closing in, Captain. Their fleet's arrival is imminent. We got maybe a few hours afore they engage us directly. We're not equipped for a prolonged fight, but we might be allowed to delay them." Solis nodded, her eyes narrowing. She knew the odds. The Void Lord's flagship, Ereshkigal, was a behemoth, its weapons capable of reducing entire cities to ash with a single blast. There was no way they could defeat it head-on, but humanity had one advantage: their adaptability, their ingenuity, their refusal to surrender. "We'll make them lead afore we go down," Solis said, her voice cold with determination. "Prepare the fleet for a diversionary strike. Give the civilians on Earth a chance to evacuate. We'll eye them as much time as we can." Her orders were precise and decisive. Beneath the surface, she felt the weight of the impending destruction. Earth wasn't just a planet. It was the cradle of humanity, and with it, the remnants of their entire species. If the Void Lords took it, humanity's legacy would be erased forever. Just as the crew scrambled to execute their orders, a burst of static from the communication console broke the tense silence. Voss looked up, his brow furrowing. "Incoming transmission. Encrypted." "Patch it through," Solis ordered. The screen flickered, then cleared, revealing a message that sent a jolt through her spine. It wasn't a message from any of their allies, nor a distress signal from Earth. It was an old frequency, a relic from humanity's first interstellar voyages. A ghost signal. "Captain Solis, this is an automated transmission from the Eclipse Project. If you are receiving this message, you must know. Humanity's survival depends on what we've left behind. We've hidden something, a weapon of unimaginable power. Coordinates follow." The message cut off abruptly, leaving the crew staring in stunned silence. "Coordinates," Voss repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. "What does this mean?" Solis was already moving, her fingers flying over the control panel. The encrypted transmission contained coordinates, a location far beyond the reach of the Void Lord fleet. It was a desperate gamble, but one that could hold the key to humanity's salvation. "Helm, plot a course to these coordinates. Full speed ahead," Solis commanded, her voice a mixture of defiance and hope. As the ship altered course, heading into the unknown, Solis felt a rush of adrenaline. This mission was now their last chance. If the weapon could be found, it might just be the salvation they needed to strike back at the Void Lords and turn the tide of war. But the Hope's Edge wasn't the only one on a collision course with the unknown. The Void Lords had sensed humanity's shift, and their fleet, relentless as ever, was closing in. In the distance, Solis could see the eerie glint of the Void Lord warships. Every moment counted. The crew raced for the unknown, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them in their search for humanity's final hope. The Hope's Edge surged forward through the blackness of space, its engines pushing the ship beyond the limits of its design. Captain Eliana Solis stood at the front of the command ridge, her eyes fixed on the viewport as stars lured into streaks of light. Her thoughts raced, each one tethered to the coordinates that had appeared out of nowhere. The voice of the mysterious transmission had promised salvation, but Solis knew all too well that promises made in the chaos of war were rarely kept. "Approaching the coordinates, Captain," reported Lieutenant Harper, the helmsman, his voice steady yet filled with the same apprehension that gripped the entire crew. "Prepare for anything," Solus replied, her eyes narrowing. "We don't know what we're walking into." The distant stars on the display began to shift as they entered a small remote sector, far from any known human settlement. The sensors flickered, momentarily unstable, as if something was locking the usual flow of data. Solus felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This was no ordinary location, no ordinary relic. "We're getting a weak signal, Captain," said Dr. Vera, the ship's chief scientist, her fingers dancing across the communication console. "It's faint, but it's definitely coming from somewhere within this sector. It matches the transmission pattern from afore." Solus' heart skipped a beat. A signal. A faint trace of humanity's past. "Lock onto it," she ordered. "Full scan of the area. Prepare the crew for a landing." The ship drifted into the heart of a forgotten nebula, the edges of which were saturated with swirling gas and dust. The sensors couldn't pierce the dense cloud, and the Hope's Edge's lights dimmed, as if to blend in with the shadow of the stars. For a moment, everything seemed to stop, the oppressive silence of space pressing in around them. Then, through the fog of gas and dust, something appeared, massive, jagged, and silent. It was the wreckage of an ancient ship, its silhouette barely visible through the haze, but unmistakable. The Aegis, the first human vessel to chart the stars in search of new worlds, lost to the universe for centuries. "By the stars, it's real," muttered Lieutenant Harper, eyes wide with disbelief. Solus felt a chill creep up her spine. The Aegis had disappeared without a trace long ago, presumed destroyed by the Void Lords, or perhaps lost to the unforgiving reaches of space. It had been humanity's first great attempt to explore beyond the solar system, and now it was here, a ghost from a time before the war. "Commander Voss, Assembly Ording Team. We're going in," Solus commanded, her voice firm, though the knot in her stomach grew tighter. The last thing she wanted was to board a centuries-old ghost ship with a crew desperate for answers. But this could be the key to humanity's survival. The team descended into the airlock, geared up and ready for whatever awaited them inside the derelict ship. As they stepped onto the cold metal of the Aegis, the eerie silence pressed in on them, amplifying every footstep, every creak of the hull. The ship's interior was dark, every corridor long and domed, as though frozen in time. The crew moved carefully, scanning for any signs of danger. Solus paused at a broken console, its controls damaged beyond repair yet still faintly glowing. She could feel the weight of history on her shoulders. The answers they sought were here, buried beneath layers of decay. But as they ventured deeper, something felt off. Too quiet, too still. "Captain," Dr. Vera's voice crackled through the comms. "We found something. You need to see this." Solus made her way to the ship's central control room. Inside, the team stood around a strange cylindrical object embedded into the floor, pulsating with an unnatural energy. It looked like nothing the crew had ever seen, an ancient device, humbling in its scale, a relic of human ambition from a time long past. "This is it," Vera whispered. "This could be the weapon. The one mentioned in the transmission. It looks like a power source, but its purpose, it's beyond anything we've encountered." Before Solus could respond, a sudden flicker of light illuminated the control room. A low hum filled the air, and the ship's emergency lights flickered to life. A low, mechanical growl echoed from the depths of the ship. "Get ready," Solus ordered. "Something's coming." The ghost ship, once a lifeless shell, was awakening, and it wasn't alone. From the shadows, something moved, fast, silent, and deadly. The Aegis wasn't just a relic, it was a trap. The hum of the Aegis grew louder as the strange, pulsing energy within the ship intensified. The crew of Hope's Edge tightened their grips on their weapons, eyes scanning the darkened corners of the control room. The low mechanical growl rever irradiated through the walls, a sound that made the hairs on the back of Solus' neck stand on end. "Move out," Solus arced, her voice sharp and commanding. Stay alert. We don't know what we're dealing with. Her team spread out in a defensive formation, weapons raised, eyes darting atween shadows. The flickering lights cast long, unsettling silhouettes along the walls as the eerie growl echoed again, followed by the unmistakable sound of skittering feet. Something fast, something alive. "Captain," whispered Lieutenant Harper, his voice tense, "I'm reading movement in the ventilation shafts above us." Solus motioned for him to stay quiet and pointed toward the ship's exit. "Voss, take a team and secure the exits. We need to know where we're going." "Harper, find the source of that noise." Harper nodded grimly and sprinted off, disappearing into the shadows. As the team moved deeper into the heart of the Aegis, the dark labyrinth of corridors stretched on like the inside of a monstrous skeleton. Ancient machinery hummed faintly beneath their feet. Solus' mind raced as she thought out the artifact they had discovered. This weapon, this unknown power source buried in the ship's core. Could it be the key to defeating the Void Lords? Or was it something more dangerous? Something that could destroy them all? Suddenly, a sharp, hissing sound echoed through the hallway. A dark shape dropped from the ceiling, too fast to track. Harper's scream cut through the air before he was yanked into the darkness above. The sound of his desperate struggle muffled the tight confines of the shaft. "Harper!" Solus shouted, moving toward the noise. A dozen more figures dropped down, their movements fluid, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They were humanoid, but their bodies were twisted, almost insect-like, with sharp claws and armored exoskeletons. Solus realized with a shock that these weren't just creatures. They were Voidlord AO weapons, mutated with the very same dark forces that had ravaged the galaxy. They were the remnants of the Voidlord's failed experiments, lurking in the wreckage of the Aegis. Solus raised her weapon, firing into the dark as the creatures charged. The first shot hit its mark, sending one of them sprawling across the floor, but the others moved too quickly. Harper's Odie was flung from the shadows, his face frozen in terror. He had barely managed to draw his weapon before being pulled apart. "Take them down," Solus shouted, her voice reeking through the chaos. She fired again, hitting another creature in the chest, but the gunfire only seemed to enrage the swarm of attackers. Commander Voss and his team burst into the room, weapons blazing, but the creatures were relentless. One of them lunged at Solus, its claws slashing the air just inches from her face. She ducked and shot it in the chest, but it was already moving, faster than she could react. "Fall back," Solus ordered. "Regroup and move to the exit." The team led toward the door, the creatures in hot pursuit. As they ran, Solus' mind raced. They needed to secure the weapon. There was no other way. But the Aegis was falling apart, and they were running out of time. The deeper they went, the stronger the resistance became. Something, or someone, didn't want them to leave. They'd reached the ship's central chamber, where the device lay, pulsating with raw power. The air around it shimmered, alive with energy. Vera had been right. It was a weapon. But the closer they got, the more they could feel the atmosphere thickening with an unnatural force. "We need to extract it now," Vera said, her voice strained as she pulled out the extraction tools. "This is far more than just a power source. It's—" Before she could finish, the entire room shook violently, a rumbling deep within the ship's core. The lights flickered and died, leaving them in total darkness. In the silence that followed, a new sound emerged, low, guttural, and resonating from the very heart of the Aegis. "Get back," Solus shouted. "Move, now." But it was too late. The floor beneath them cracked open, and a massive dark shape rose from the depths of the ship, a grotesque, mechanical creature, its limbs made of the same EO-engineered material as the monsters they'd just fought. It was an abomination, part machine, part living organism, and its eyes glowed with a terrifying, malevolent intelligence. The weapon wasn't the key to saving humanity. It was a icon for the Void Lord's true weapon. Solus didn't have time to think. They had to fight their way out, or the entire galaxy would earn. The creature towered over them, its hulking form a grotesque fusion of technology and flesh. Its glowing eyes pierced the darkness, and a low, rumbling growl escaped its mechanical jaws. The entire chamber trembled with its presence. The Aegis seemed to hum with the energy of this terry-look creation, as if the ship itself were alive with malice. "We're not leaving here alive if we don't stop that thing," Solus shouted, drawing her laster and firing directly at the creature's exposed core. The shots ricocheted harmlessly off its thick armor, leaving no visible damage. It didn't even flinch. Commander Voss gritted his teeth and leveled his weapon, but it was clear that the odds were stacked against them. The creature lunged, faster than anything that massive should have been, its claws swiping through the air with unnatural precision. Solus airily dodged, the sharp edge of one claw grazing her shoulder, sending a searing pain through her Odie. "We need to find its weak point," Vera shouted from behind Solus, scrambling for cover. Anything that can wreak its armor." The team fired relentlessly, but it was like attacking a mountain with a slingshot. The creature airily seemed to notice their efforts, its attention fixed on the small vulnerable humans who dared to threaten its existence. "Fall act to the entrance," Solus ordered, her mind racing as she assessed the situation. Their only hope now was to reach the ship's exit and regroup, but as they retreated, the creature followed, relentless in its pursuit. It moved too fast, too easily, cutting off their escape routes with each step it took. Suddenly, a voice broke through the chaos. "Captain, we've got a problem." Lieutenant Harper's voice crackled over the comms. "The Voidlord fleet has arrived. They're already deploying forces to intercept us." Solus felt her heart drop. The last thing she needed was to be caught between an unstoppable enemy and a maddened EO weapon. She had expected the Voidlords to follow them, but not so soon. The timing was too perfect, almost as if they had known exactly where to find them. "We can't escape our threats," Voss said, his face grim as he fired another volley into the creature, which only seemed to grow angrier. "Captain, what do we do?" Solus' mind raced. If the Voidlords had anticipated their arrival, if they had been tracking them from the start, then the Aegis was no longer just a source of potential salvation. It was a trap. The enemy had known exactly where they'd go, and the weapon, this so-called salvation, had been set in motion from the moment they arrived. "Betrayal," Solus muttered under her breath, a realization dawning on her. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a lure. Her eyes flicked to Dr. Vera, who had been examining the device since their arrival. Vera looked up, her expression changing as she caught the captain's gaze. "You," Solus Egan, her voice hardening. "You knew about this, didn't you? The Aegis, the IO weapon, the timing. You've been playing both sides." Vera stiffened, her face pale. "What are you talking about?" "I don't." "You're one of them," Solus interrupted, pointing her weapon at Vera. "A Voidlord sympathizer. You've been working with them, haven't you?" Vera's eyes widened in shock and then narrowed with cold realization. She looked around at the crew, seeing the distrust in their eyes. "It's not what you think, Captain. I didn't choose this." "Then why?" Solus pressed, her voice dangerously quiet. "Why lead us into this trap? Why bring us to a ship that's clearly designed to be a econ for the Voidlords?" Vera took a step back, clearly shaken, but not yet defeated. "I was trying to stop them. You have to understand. The Voidlords, they're not the real threat. It's the ones who created them. The ones who created this." She gestured toward the IO weapon, which was now stalking toward them. "The Voidlords are just pawns, I thought." "You thought what?" Solus demanded. "That you could control this. Use it against them." Vera hesitated, then nodded. "I was trying to learn their weaknesses, their history, to stop the real enemy. But the moment I activated that beacon, it was too late. They knew we were coming." The truth hit Solus like a physical blow. It all made sense now. The mysterious transmission, the signal, the weapon. It wasn't designed to save humanity. It was a ploy, a way to draw them out, to lure them into the heart of the Void Lord's empire. And Vera had known all along. Before Solus could react, the creature lunged again, this time knocking Vera aside with a brutal swipe of its claws. The team immediately opened fire once more, but their efforts were hopeless. The creature was too strong, too fast. Enough talking, Solus shouted. We need to get out, now. The team regrouped, retreating deeper into the ship as the creature pursued relentlessly. Solus' mind raced, but she couldn't afford to dwell on a trail. Not now. The Void Lord fleet was closing in, and their only hope of survival lay in making it act to the Hope's Edge alive. But as they ran, Solus couldn't shake the chilling realization. Vera wasn't the only one who had made deals with the enemy. The galaxy was aweave of betrayals, and they were all caught in its snare. The Aegis groaned as its ancient systems protested the rapid movement of its new inhabitants. The Io weapon, now a relentless force of destruction, pursued them without pause, its mechanical limbs screeching as it tore through the ship's corridors. The crew of Hope's Edge sprinted through the labyrinthine passages, dodging the swipes of the creature, trying to maintain their formation despite the chaos. We can't outrun it forever, Voss shouted, his voice hoarse with exertion. We need a plan, Solus. Solus's mind was spinning. The weapon, the creatures, the sudden arrival of the Void Lord fleet. It was all too much. They had walked right into the enemy's grasp, and now they had no choice but to fight or die. The creature behind them was closing in, its growls vibrating through the walls. There was no escape unless they fought back. But the Io weapon was far too powerful for them to defeat head-on. Vera, Solus arced, her voice cutting through the panic. You know this ship better than any of us. How can we stop it? Vera, her eyes wide with fear, glanced back at the rampaging creature. The core. If we can reach the main reactor, we might allow to overload the ship's systems. It'll destroy the creature, but it could also destroy us. Then we'll have to make sure it doesn't take us down with it, Solus said, her gaze sharp. We head for the reactor. Now. They pushed forward, every footstep heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. The corridors of the Aegis seemed to stretch on forever, a maze of dark, rusting passages and empty rooms. The Io weapon was relentless, but there was no choice. The reactor was their only shot. Harper, cover our rear, Solus ordered, glancing back as the creature's growls grew louder. Everyone else, keep moving. Harper nodded grimly, taking his position at the back of the group. He fired a few shots down the hall, trying to slow the creature's advance. But it was futile. Each shot seemed to only enrage it more. The creature was gaining on them, its speed increasing with each passing second. We're not going to make it, Dr. Vera muttered, her breath quickening as she struggled to keep up. There's no way we can reach the reactor in time. We don't have a choice, Solus said, her voice unshaken. Keep moving. They rounded a corner, and in the distance, the faint glow of the reactor's control room came into view. Solus could feel the heat of the machine before they even reached it. The reactor was at the heart of the ship, its power feeding into every system, from the artificial gravity to the weapons systems that had once made the Aegis a formidable force. If they could overload it, the resulting explosion might destroy the Io weapon and cripple the Void Lord's plans. But the way was locked. The creature had anticipated their move. It was waiting for them, standing guard in front of the reactor's entrance, its massive form silhouetted against the flashing lights of the reactor's emergency systems. Its eyes earned with an unnatural rage as it spotted them. A shrill, mechanical screech split the air, and the creature charged, faster than any human could react. Brace for impact, Voss shouted, diving toward the control panel as he tried to activate the ship's emergency defense systems. The creature was upon them in seconds. Solus barely had time to raise her weapon before the creature lunged, knocking her axe into the wall. Pain exploded across her chest, and for a moment, everything went black. But her training kicked in. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the pain, and grated a near-eye energy pulse grenade from her belt. "Now," she shouted, hurling the grenade toward the creature's exposed side. The explosion rang out like thunder, sending the creature reeling. It howled in pain, its mechanical limbs twitching erratically as the grenade's energy disrupted its systems. But it wasn't enough to stop it. The creature lunged again, a lure of fury and destruction. Vira, desperate and afraid, reached for the control panel on the side of the door. "I can disable the reactor's security protocols, but we need a few minutes," she called out. "Do it." Solus snapped, her voice commanding as she raised her weapon and fired directly at the creature's chest. The shots seemed to slow it down, but it was still coming. Solus's mind raced. They had minutes, maybe seconds, afore the creature overwhelmed them, afore the Voidlord fleet closed in. The mission had to succeed, or humanity would be finished. The team pushed forward, firing everything they had at the creature, trying to buy Vera enough time to get the reactor offline. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of earning metal. Every shot, every second felt like an eternity. Finally, Vera shouted, "I've got it. The security's down." The doors to the reactor room slid open, revealing the glowing core at the center of the ship. Solus didn't hesitate. Everyone inside now. They rushed into the room, weapons still raised, but the creature wasn't far behind. Solus pressed a button on the reactor's control panel, setting the overload sequence in motion. The countdown began. "Get clear," Solus shouted as the creature charged one final time. They had no more time to fight it. The reactor was their only hope now. With one last look at the creature earing down on them, Solus and her team sprinted toward the exit, the hum of the reactor growing louder and louder in their ears. Behind them, the creature let out an earth-shaking screech. But it was too late. The reactor's energy surged, and the Aegis, along with the creature, began to collapse in on itself. In the distance, Solus could see the Voidlord fleet waiting. They had no idea what was coming. The explosion would be their reckoning. The shockwave from the reactor's overload slammed into the Aegis with such force that the entire ship seemed to shudder, groan, and then fracture. Solus and her team stumbled as the ship's structural integrity was torn apart, debris and sparks flying through the corridors like confetti in the wake of a storm. The Aegis was dying, the ancient warship collapsing in on itself as the self-destruction sequence triggered its final, catastrophic meltdown. "Keep moving," Solus shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "The Hope's Edge is just ahead. We can make it." Their oats pounded against the shaking floors as they raced through the corridors, the walls rattling, the air thick with smoke and earning metal. Vira, reefless and shaking from the stress, took point, leading them toward the ship's emergency airlock. Behind them, the Aegis was already beginning to tear apart, large chunks of metal and debris falling to the ground with thunderous crashes. The creature, the IO weapon, was still alive, though severely damaged. It was crawling toward them, its mechanical limbs twitching in desperation, fueled by some inhuman, unyielding drive. "Move faster," Voss urged, voice strained as he fired a few last desperate shots behind them. The creature didn't flinch, but the ullet slowed it for just a moment. It wasn't enough. The weapon was relentless, and they were running out of time. They burst through the airlock just as the final last of energy from the reactor engulfed the ship. The Aegis was torn apart in an instant, an inferno of heat and light that linded them as the shockwave pushed them forward. For a moment, Solus felt as though the universe itself had exhaled, expelling everything in a fiery wreath. The doors slammed shut, sealing them inside the Hope's Edge. They were safe, for now. But as the ship's emergency systems kicked in, Solus knew this was far from over. "Status report," Solus demanded, her voice cool despite the pounding adrenaline in her veins. Reactor overload confirmed, Dr. Vera replied, her face pale and drawn as she staggered to a console. The Aegis has been destroyed, but the Voidlord fleet is still intact. They've begun mobilizing. They know we're here. Solus's stomach twisted. It had worked. The Aegis was gone, the IO weapon neutralized, but the Voidlords had seen their move. The Hope's Edge had airily escaped, but the enemy wasn't fooled. They'd be hunted down now. The Voidlords would never forgive them for destroying one of their ships. Harper, what's our position? Solus asked, turning to the helmsman, who was still trying to regain control of the ship after the explosion. We're in the outer rim, Captain, Harper replied, his voice strained. The Aegis has triggered the Voidlord's full alert. We're not getting out of here unnoticed. I've got the Hope's Edge up and running again, but they'll be on us in minutes. Then we make it count, Solus said, her gaze hardening. All systems to maximum power. Set a course for the closest human outpost. We need reinforcements, fast. Vira's voice shook as she spoke, the weight of their losses earing down on her. Do you think they'll be allowed to stop the Voidlords? Our forces. We'll make it, Solus interrupted, her tone resolute. Humanity has survived worse. This isn't the end. Not yet. As the crew scrambled to prepare for the coming battle, Solus's mind raced. The Voidlord's fleet was vast and powerful, but humanity had fought them before. They could fight them again. The destruction of the Aegis was a painful but necessary sacrifice, and now it had to be used to fuel their resistance. We got no choice but to fight, Solus said, her voice cold but firm. We've lost too much to act down now. Suddenly, the ship lurched again, this time more violently. A deafening alarm lared throughout the corridors, and the lights flickered. The Voidlord fleet was closing in faster than they expected. Captain, we're being tracked, Harper said, his voice strained. They've got us locked in. It's a direct assault, full force. They've already sent interceptors. Prepare for battle, Solus ordered, her gaze steely. This is it. We fight until we can't fight anymore. The crew rushed to their stations as the Hope's Edge began to shake under the assault of the Voidlord fleet. The massive warship's guns hummed to life, targeting systems locking onto the incoming ships. They had airily escaped the Aegis's destruction, but the real battle was only beginning. And this time, they weren't running. Solus stood at the command center, her hand steady on the controls. Her crew was ready. Humanity was ready. All hands, she said, her voice calm but filled with resolve. This is our fight. We're not just fighting for our lives. We're fighting for the future of the galaxy. The ship's weapons fired, and the stars outside exploded into a frenzy of bright lights and violent explosions. The battle had begun, and Solus knew one thing for certain. They would not go down quietly. Not while humanity still had wreath to fight. The Hope's Edge sailed into the heart of the Voidlord fleet, ready for the fight of their lives. The Voidlord fleet was vast, larger than anything Solus had imagined. Hundreds of dark, menacing warships formed a deadly formation, their engines glowing with a cold, sickly light as they advanced toward the Hope's Edge. The air on the ridge was thick with tension as the crew readied themselves for the battle ahead. Captain, the enemy's weapons are already charging, Lieutenant Harper reported, his fingers flying across the control panel. They'll be in firing range in under a minute. Understood, Solus replied, her voice steady despite the pulse of adrenaline surging through her veins. Target their lead ship. We need to make a statement. The massive guns of the Hope's Edge powered up, their energy beams glowing as the targeting systems locked onto the largest Voidlord vessel, the flagship. Solus could feel the ship's hull reverberate with the power of their weapons charging. In the distance, the fleet's ships seemed to move in perfect formation, as if they had planned their assault down to the second. Captain, they're launching interceptors, Voss said, his voice tight with concentration. Hundreds of them, faster than our turrets can track. Solus didn't hesitate. All point defense systems, activate. fire at will. The ship's automated defenses hummed to life, and the Hope's Edge's turrets eager to unleash a barrage of energy volts into the swarm of incoming fighters. Each shot found its mark, tearing apart the Voidlord interceptors before they could even get close. The hull of the ship shuddered with the impact of stray rounds, but they were holding their own. "We're not going to allow to keep this up forever," Vera said, her face pale but determined. "The Voidlord fleet is too massive. We need to reek through their formation." Solus nodded, her mind working at a rapid pace. The Hope's Edge was tough, but it wasn't invincible. They needed to hit the Voidlords hard, wreak their defenses before they could overwhelm them. Harper set a course directly through their line. "Full thrust," Solus ordered. "We'll punch through their formation, hit their core, and keep them distracted long enough for reinforcements to arrive." A shocked silence followed her command. But then Harper's fingers flew across the controls. "Aye, Captain. Full thrust, engaging course now." The Hope's Edge's engines roared to life as the ship lurched forward, cutting through the waves of enemy fighters like a knife through flesh. The Voidlords had underestimated their speed and resolve. The ship hurtled through the mass of interceptors, its point defense guns picking off any that got too close. But they weren't going to last long. The flagship's shields were already powering up, and Solus knew the next moments would decide everything. "Target their main weapon systems," she arced, locking onto the flagship's weak point. "Take down their ability to strike first." The Hope's Edge's guns unleashed a concentrated barrage of firepower, streaking toward the Voidlord flagship. Explosions erupted along the enemy ship's hull, sending shards of debris flying. But the shields held. Airily. They needed more. "Vera, you've got the reactor controls," Solus said, her eyes narrowing. "Get ready to engage. We need to push them into range." "I'm on it," Vera replied, her fingers dancing over the console. "But we need to be careful. If we trigger the overload too soon, we'll take out our own fleet with it." "We'll take that risk," Solus said with conviction. "Do it." The Hope's Edge surged forward, lasting through the formation, closing the distance to the Voidlord flagship. Behind them, the remaining fighters were closing in, but the Hope's Edge was a juggernaut, and it wasn't slowing down. The Voidlord fleet tried to regroup, but they hadn't expected such an aggressive assault. "We're in range," Harper called out. "Targeting now." The energy beams from the Hope's Edge's forward cannons cut through the darkness, piercing the flagship's shields and striking its core. The flagship ucked, its engines flaring with sparks. The Voidlord commanders had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the human resolve, and now they were paying the price. "Target their reactor," Solus said, her voice cold. "Hit them where it hurts." Vira's hands flew over the controls, and the ship's systems hummed in agreement. With a final, concentrated push, the Hope's Edge's weapons unleashed everything they had into the flagship's exposed reactor. A series of explosions rang out across the ship, the Voidlord flagship shuddering under the barrage. "Impact!" Vera shouted as the flagship's shields finally crumpled under the weight of their assault. "It's going critical." The Voidlord flagship was not going down quietly. Its core imploded in a blinding flash of light, and the entire ship ripped apart in a violent cascade of energy. The shockwave sent the Hope's Edge reeling, but the crew held their ground. The battle wasn't over, but the Voidlords had lost their command vessel. "Reinforcements are en route," Voss said, his voice filled with relief. "We've given them a chance." Solus didn't accelerate. She knew the battle was far from won. The Voidlords still outnumbered them, and their fleet was regrouping. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Solus allowed herself a small wreath of relief. They had made the first strike, and humanity wasn't done fighting. The Voidlord fleet was far from finished. Their flagship's destruction sent a ripple through their lines, but it also galvanized them into a more deadly assault. The remaining Voidlord warships closed in, regrouping for a counteroffensive. The Hope's Edge was battered, its hull cracked and its systems strained, but it still held together, its crew united in the face of overwhelming odds. "Captain, reinforcements are en route," Vera said, her fingers flying over the console. "But they're still several hours away. We've got to hold the line until they get here." Solus clenched her jaw. They didn't have hours. With the Void Lord's fleet regrouping, they had minutes, maybe seconds, afore the enemy pounced. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We need to buy time. Harper, set a course for the nearest asteroid belt. We'll use the terrain to our advantage." Harper nodded, his hands quick on the controls. "Course plotted. I'll get us to cover." The ship shuddered as the Void Lord fleet fired. But the Hope's Edge maneuvered through the incoming fire, its shields flickering under the strain. The asteroid belt loomed ahead, a dense field of rock and debris that would provide some cover, but not for long. The Void Lords wouldn't be fooled for long. "Enemy fighters incoming," Voss reported, his voice tense as the communication systems layered with alarms. "They're sending everything they've got." Willie swarmed. "We can't let them overwhelm us," Solus said, her voice calm but filled with the weight of leadership. "Harper, get us into that asteroid field." Voss, man the forward defenses. "We need to thin their ranks." The Hope's Edge plunged into the asteroid field, weaving and dodging between massive floating rocks as Void Lord interceptors pursued them relentlessly. The sounds of battle filled the air, the high-pitched whine of energy lasts, and the deeper, thunderous crashes of missiles and debris colliding. Solus gritted her teeth, watching the radar as the Void Lord fleet closed in. There was no time for subtlety now. They had to strike fast, hit the enemy hard, and hold on long enough for their reinforcements to arrive. "We're out to be surrounded," Voss warned, his eyes scanning the rapidly dwindling open space around them. "We won't have a clean shot." "We don't need a clean shot," Solus replied with grim determination. "Vera, initiate the ship's final defense protocol. We're going to use the Hope's Edge as 8. Vera froze for a moment, staring at Solus in disbelief. "What do you mean?" "The final defense protocol. That's too dangerous. It's the only chance we have. We use our position, lure them in close, and then we hit them with everything we've got," Solus said, her eyes narrowing. "Prepare the overload sequence. We're going to make this count." Vyra hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Understood. Initiating." The Hope's Edge's internal systems began to hum as Vera tapped into the final line of defense. The ship's engines surged, the energy reserves yielding rapidly. The Void Lords, so focused on their prey, were closing in, unaware of the trap that was being set. "We're drawing them in," Harper reported, his voice calm but tense as he piloted the ship through the field, expertly dodging incoming fire. "Another minute, and we'll be in position." Solus's fingers tightened around the armrests of her command chair. Every second counted. The Void Lords were closing in, their ships surrounding them like a deadly noose. Soon, the Hope's Edge would be caught in their trap, and they would have no escape. Then, the moment arrived. "Now." Solus arced, her voice cutting through the chaos. Vyra's hands slammed down on the console, and the ship's final defense systems came to life. The Hope's Edge unleashed a devastating barrage of energy blasts, channeled through its overloaded reactor. The last was enough to tear through the closest Void Lord ships, their shields collapsing under the onslaught. The surrounding asteroid field was rocked with a shockwave, sending debris flying in all directions. The Void Lord's forces staggered, disoriented with the sudden explosion, their formation disrupted. The Hope's Edge took advantage of the confusion, turning its guns on the weakened ships. But the Hope's Edge wasn't done yet. "Prepare to fire the final payload," Solus commanded, her voice steely. "We're going to finish this." As the Void Lords reeled from the first wave, the Hope's Edge unleashed everything it had left. The weapons that had been holding steady for so long flared with renewed power, streaking across the battlefield like a deadly storm. The Void Lord fleet buckled under the assault, the remaining warships losing their shields and crumbling under the airage. One by one, they fell. The enemy's retaliation came too late. As the last Voidlord ship disintegrated in a fiery explosion, the battle ended in a resounding silence. Solus took a wreath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. They had done it. The Voidlord fleet was decimated, their command structure shattered. But the victory had come at a heavy price. The Hope's Edge was airily holding together, and the crew had given everything they had. "We did it, Captain," Vera said quietly, her voice filled with awe and exhaustion. Solus nodded, her gaze fixed on the stars beyond the viewport. This is just the beginning. The remaining Voidlord ships had been destroyed, but the war wasn't over. The destruction of their fleet had sent a message, a warning to the Voidlords. Humanity was not defeated. They would rise from the ashes and fight back, no matter the cost. As the reinforcements finally arrived, bringing with them the hope of a new resistance, Solus knew one thing for sure. The galaxy was shattered, but it was far from broken, and humanity would rebuild it, one victory at a time.